welcome to my art studio today. This is Annie. I'm going to show you today how to make a colorful watercolor sunset, and I'm going to show you two different options, and of course you can always add your own ideas and interpretation. I'm going to be showing you how to do a sunset. This one that's focusing mainly on the sky and the water with some silhouettes in the distance. And then I'm also going to be showing you, if you'd like to add more silhouetting, a version that has some more trees and silhouette in the foreground. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be using for this video my Arches watercolor block. This is something that is not a beginner level piece of studio equipment. This would be something to invest in once you're a little more committed to doing watercolors. If you don't have an Arches watercolor block, that's completely fine. You can also make this either on your mixed media paper or on your watercolor paper. And if you're using either of these two options, I recommend that you have some tape and you pull your paper out of your tablet and you stretch it onto a flat surface, taping all four edges down with your tape, and that will help your paper stay in place while you're painting, because we are going to be using the watercolors pretty watery, and that will help there be less bubbling and warping on your paper as you work. Other materials that you need today are your paint set, and I've got just my basic Prang semi-moist watercolor tray over here. I also have water, paper towels. The main star of this show is going to be a big flat brush. When we get to the silhouette portion, you may want some other brushes, such as a medium round brush, small round brush, or like a medium to smallish flat brush. But the very main portion of the sky and the water is going to be completed with this big flat brush. Other materials that you need are at the very end. You can use a paint marker to do the bit of the sun. If you don't have a paint marker, here are two different kinds that I really like, either the Posca or the Sharpie. They're both white. If you don't have those, when you're all done, you can paint in the white sun with either some white acrylic paint or some gouache. So we're gonna get started, and just like in the first sunset video where we put the colors in a certain order so that they play nicely, we're going to do that today because we're going to be working with all of our paints as they're wet. I always repeat, want it to stick into your brain that watercolors will only go where it's wet. If you're working with a wet color next to a wet color, they're gonna blend. If you're working with colors that you don't want to blend, you need to wait for them to dry. So for this piece, we're going to work with the sky and the water as it's wet. Then we're going to wait for it to dry, and then we're going to paint in any silhouettes that we want to add. So let's get started. I'm going to start with some orange. The orange is going to be the middle part of the sky and the middle part of the water. For the sky, we're going to be using arched brush strokes. For the water, we're going to be using skinny horizontal brush strokes. So you'll want to get used to shaping your brush down into a flat point like this. And for the water, the brush strokes are going to be nice and skinny like lines. So let's start with the sky. I'm starting with my bright orange. I have two oranges here. I have a more yellowy orange or a more red orange. You can see that my red orange doesn't get a lot of action. I don't think I've used it even one time. This is really my favorite. That's just a personal preference on this piece. You could really use either one. It depends on if you want it darker or you want it more yellowy, which I want mine more yellowy. So I'm gonna start really boldly where I want my horizon line, and I'm just gonna paint a line. I'm using the brush upright, I'm using it skinny, but I don't want a big fat line here. And then I'm gonna start with the orange part of the sunset and paint an arch shape over that line that I just made. For the sky especially, I really like to allow a lot of that watery feathering that watercolor does in between the colors. It's really pretty. I think one of my favorite things about watercolor, just like soup, if you add more water, it waters down the flavor. Think of that for your paint. If you add more water, it waters down the color. So if you want it lighter, you need to use more water and less pigment. If you want it brighter, you can add more just pigment without adding water. To soften that edge, I'm just taking a wet brush along the top there. Now we're going to go straight into painting the orange portion of the water. Again, we're going to shape our brush down back into this nice flat shape where we've got this nice edge. And we're going to use that to make horizontal lines in the shape of a V. So I'm going to go back and forth. I need a little more water in the center, and I'm starting to form my V. It's okay that it's going into the sky. As I start to form my V, I'm spreading out the marks just a little bit more to show that play of the ripples in the water. Always keeping my brush at that nice shape and working it back and forth like a little broom or like a pendulum on a clock. I'm not going to think too hard about this. I'm going to get the orange off my brush, and I'm removing any excess water onto my paper towel. Now I'm going to move on to magenta. You can use pink, or my magenta in the tray looks really purpley, but once you start painting it, it's really magenta-y. So I'm going to get that warmed up with a little water, and I'm going to do the sky next. I'm going to boldly place that arch shape, and I'm using my brush wide, and I'm allowing the magenta to go into that wet arch that I left there at the very end. If you want parts that are bolder color, just get more paint on your brush without adding more water to what's there. And I'm touching that in there and letting it kind of do its thing. If you want to soften it a little, you can kind of pull your brush across it. Watercolor really changes as it dries. I like that play of the water and the paints as it dries. And again, I'm going to take some light water along the top and just soften that edge. Right here, if it's gotten too soft for you, you can either add more magenta or more orange. I think I'm going to add a little more orange in there. Parts of it are a little soft for me. Just kind of watch it. Watch it as it's drying. If it's leaving too harsh of an edge, just put a little extra water. You'll notice, especially if you're using paint that you've stretched onto a surface, you'll get a little bubbling in your paper as you work that will lead to a little bit of pooling, which I don't mind about watercolor. I think it adds to some really cool shapes. Once I'm kind of happy with that, we've let this orange settle, but it's definitely not dry. And again, we're going to make sure to work our brush into that flat shape. It's all flattened and reshaped. I'm getting some magenta on my brush, and we're going to work a V around the orange. We're going to build like a safety net around the orange of magenta so that when we go to the blue and the purple don't mix with the orange. Magenta plays very nicely with orange, but blue and purple do not. So we're going to build a barrier of color around it. And I'm just working, again, those horizontal shapes. You can go back and forth. Watch it as it blends. It's okay to leave a little white. I like a little white. Make sure you are altering your brush stroke back and forth, because you can see if you only go one way, it makes all your brush strokes the same shape. So if you go back and forth on them a little bit, you get a little zigzagginess. Don't think too hard about this. We're not making a scientific drawing of a sunset. We're making an artistic representation of it. So it doesn't have to be a certain way. What we're practicing here is getting to know our paints and how we use them and how they interact. Now at the very end here, that barrier of color between the orange and the next colors, I went ahead and made a line of magenta along the rest of my horizon. Now that will protect that orange from the rest of my colors, because the next two colors are purple and then blue, both of which when they mix with the orange they turn kind of a black color, so we don't want that. That's again why we're building this barrier of magenta, which does play nice with orange, and it does play really nicely with the next colors too. We're in control of how the colors are going to blend with each other. The timing of this works really well because while we were painting this, the sky has settled. It's not dry, but it's not as watery as when we first started. And now I'm going to go on to a more purple color. And again, I'm going to work in that arch shape. And I like my colors really bold always. If you don't like that, use less pigment in your paint. You can also take your paper towel, bring it down a few notches, wipe it, and you'll see even after you make those marks, that kind of softens. I can soften it more with some water on my brush. Pay attention to to your paper. Don't overdo it with the water. If you start to see a lot of pooling and big puddles of water, you want to lift that up a little bit with your paper towel. I really like bold colors, so I'm taking just now paint into the wet part and touching it in, kind of dragging it across. And look at that beautiful feathering. I love that part about watercolor. Look at that beautiful transition. I love it. So now again, I've got my brush back to that shape, and I'm going to go with the horizontal brush strokes. And it's really dark, so I'm going to get a little more water on there. We've got that barrier of magenta, so I'm working in that V shape again for my water. Make sure to go back and forth so you get varied brush strokes. You don't get brush strokes that are all the same shape. Do it on both sides. So it's kind of making that sweeping back and forth, a little pendulum of a clock move. And that's where that shape becomes really important, because if your brush isn't reshaped, these lines tend to get really fat. Your marks get bigger and they group together a little bit more. I'm working up against the horizon, and I really like the play of the purple and the blue. So I'm going to boldly make some darker ripple lines over here. My marks are getting a little wide. Reshape my brush, and you can see the parts where the pigment is darker and the paint is still wet. See how the purple's bleeding up? It's bleeding into the magenta, giving these really cool marks. That's what the magenta did in the orange as it was drying too. And if parts of your orange are dry, you can take a little purple really close to it. The colors of a sunset kind of dance around in ripples. They don't stay exactly in a shape. They kind of move and dance. You just want to be careful that where you're putting purple near orange, that the orange is dry. Otherwise, the orange and the purple blended together will create kind of a black color. Cleaning off my brush, controlling the water with my paper towel. My paper towel is getting pretty wet here. Now moving on to blue. I have two blues in here that I really like the way they interact with the purple. So that's something that you'll get to know as you paint more. I'm going to use a little bit of both. First, I'm going to use some of this teal blue and paint boldly that arch shape. And my purple, and I did this on purpose, I didn't put a wet stripe up there so you could see the difference. Now I'm boldly putting some of this blue over it and letting them interact. That harsh line is softening because of the wetness of the blue paint. Now I'm going to add some darker blue, and you can go ahead and fill it in now. And the more you brush your transitions between the two colors, the softer that transition will get, the more the paints will blend. If you don't want them to blend a lot, don't keep brushing it. You can see what just happened. While I was getting blue paint, I dripped some into my orange. If you catch it right away, you can get it to a dry part of your paper towel and just absorb it. If I really wanted to take it down a few more notches, I could put some water on it and do the same process again. I don't mind when that sort of stuff happens. It didn't turn into an ugly color, and to me it's just adding some more of the atmosphere of this painting. Getting my brush back down to that shape, and then I'm gonna start adding some blue watery ripples. When you think about painting water, don't let it play mind games with you. The color of water is the color of the things around it. It's reflecting all the other colors that you've used in your painting. This water is the same color as my sky. Same paints, same color, and it's just reflecting those colors down in a kind of different brush stroke and a different shape. You know exactly what this is. It's very vibrant, colorful water, but you know that it's water. So when you're doing a painting and it has water in it, don't let it mess with you because water is clear, or a lot of times we see water, it's blue because it's reflecting the sky. So you make your water blue if you've used blue in the sky or the things around it. It's a clear substance. And how do you depict something clear? Well, we don't want to leave it white unless it's white all around. One of the important parts of painting is observing things that you see. Do yourself a favor if you like to paint nature, spend time looking at nature. Spend time looking at how water moves and what shape shape it's in, how colors reflect in it. Same with trees or any other natural thing. You know, look at how branches are shaped and where they point and how they connect. Now I'm kind of filling this in, still using that horizontal brush stroke, but I am letting the blue group together a lot more out here. That also gives a sense of scale. The marks out on the edge of the water, which are closer to us, are bigger and bolder and wider. The marks that are farther away in this part of the painting are smaller and more delicate. That gives this painting a sense of scale. When you're done messing around with your water, you need to take a pause and let this dry before you can paint the silhouette. If you're just painting a little bit of land, then the orange and the top of the water needs to be dry. But if you're painting a full silhouette, you want your whole water scene to be dry. I'm going to pause this and let you mess with your water until you're completely happy with it. And then you need to pause your painting and let it be dry before we go on to the silhouette. The way you check if it's dry, if you can see that it's shiny, obviously, then it's still wet. If it looks dry and you touch it and it still feels cool or damp a little bit, then it's not quite dry enough yet. So wait till there's no shiny marks, wait till it doesn't feel cool or damp, and then we'll come back to paint. So now we're going to level up this composition by adding some silhouettes. We're going to start by adding a simple distant piece of land silhouette far away, and you can stop there if you'd like. If you want to keep going and add some silhouettes in the foreground, I'm going to do that as well. So right now we're going to start with the silhouettes by working with the black paint, and the black paint in this set is really dark. It's really inky, so make sure that you are aware of that when you start working. I like to pull a little bit off into the tray and bring some over so I'm in control of just how dark it is. In this case, we are going to be working with it full black to make this silhouette. So again, it's important that this is all the way dry. We're going to be painting a silhouette here, so if the orange or the water is wet, the watercolor will go where it's wet, right? So if these are wet, the watercolor is going to bleed down into your beautiful colors. So make sure it's dry by making sure it's not shiny, you can't see any water, and then you can lightly touch it, and if it still feels cool or damp, then just wait a little bit longer. While we were waiting, I looked at my clock, and it did take about 10 minutes for this to be dry enough, but use your own judgment and make sure that you check yours for yourself. I'm going to grab my medium round brush and use some black paint, and I'm going to start by drawing two little pieces of land out here on the horizon. So without being afraid, this is scary to paint black over your beautiful composition. Just start by drawing a line with the tip of your brush, and it doesn't even have to be perfectly straight because the land might kind of come out and come down a little further. So if you start to go a little crooked, just work with that with your piece of land. So I'm doing that just to show you what that's like. I'm gonna just really easily go up and make some kind of hill shapes. And again, when I mentioned, observing land and looking around at things, in my mind, from looking at land on water, it's kind of higher, and then as it gets closer to the water, it's lower because it's beach, or it's the part where the water crashes up. So that's why I've got this kind of shape. And I'm just going to take the tip of my brush and work up. To me, I'm making kind of a pine tree landscape. And just do it till it feels right. I got a little extra dot there of black, so I'm just gonna work with it and make a little bit more land come out. Silhouettes are really fun. You shouldn't be scared of them because if you mess up, you just kind of change what you were doing. The round brush is great to use because you can use it really big, fill in the spaces, or you can use the tip of it to make these little tiny little shapes. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, make some more land, and it doesn't have to be the same as that, it can be different. Since I am going to be adding some in the foreground, I'm kind of bringing my land pretty far in. If you're not planning to do some silhouettes in the foreground, you can leave them pretty wide. This is just up to you and how you want your silhouette to look. So here I'm making my land kind of how far out I want it, and then I'm gonna kind of go back up, skinny to fat. And then I'm gonna work some of that tree shape into it just by pushing the tip of my brush up a little bit. Almost a zigzag, but try to make it uneven so it doesn't look too zigzaggy. If it looks too zigzag up and down even, just go mess it up a little bit. Make parts of it taller. If you're happy with that, you can stop there. I'm going to paint the silhouette in the foreground, and then the final step will be to paint a little bit of the sun in the middle with the paint markers. So if you are done with your silhouette, you can either just watch the rest of the video and be happy, or you can skip to the next step. If you want to add some more silhouette in the foreground, like these bold pine trees, I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm going to start by making this land shape in the foreground. And just add a little bit at a time. Grow the land. Don't start way up here. Start kind of low and see how you like it. You can always add more to your silhouette, but you can't really take it away once it's there. This can be scary because you're covering up parts of your painting and you may really like that part. So again, you don't have to add this. If you want to just leave it as the background silhouette, it's pretty that way too. So I'm using full strength black here, and this is again important that this water is dry. Otherwise, this black will bleed into all those beautiful colors that we spent so much time making. I'm not overthinking this. I'm underthinking it. Don't be afraid. You know, you can always edit it. The silhouettes are very forgiving. You can always add a little bit more as you go along. I'm gonna do what one of my favorites, Bob Ross, is calling bravery test. I'm gonna paint a big black tree in front of this, and it can be so scary, and that's why I love that he calls it a bravery test. So I am switching now to a medium to small flat brush. Just like we did with the water, I'm shaping it down into a point, because the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to draw the stump or the wooden part of the tree. I think I kind of want to make two over here and one over here. I'm gonna start with one over here, and I want it to be about this tall. So here's your bravery test, as Bob would say. Using your brush skinny ways, straight up and down, paint a line straight down. Now comes the fun, because you're gonna paint in the branches. We're gonna continue to use the brush skinny ways and just build those branches out, kind of like we did. I'm not really sweeping it back and forth, I'm tapping it back and forth. Repeat to yourself. You can always add more. If it doesn't look right, you can always add more of this. Make it fatter, make it bigger. Pine trees are such a forgiving tree to paint. You can fill them in. I like to leave a little bit of holes so you can see the pretty water. Up to you if you want to start at the bottom or the top. One of the ways that a pine tree can go wrong is it's too fat. But then again too, there's all different kinds of pine trees. So if you want to start at the top and make it fatter from there. Now up here at the top, I turned my brush to be more up so that you get more of a point. I'm just tapping these line-shaped brush strokes in and grouping them together more at the beginning. And go ahead and do, even though you can't see it really clearly, go ahead and just continue to fill it in as if that piece of land weren't back there. Now you can see, since I started at the bottom of the tree, I need to widen up this tree. And as I work down to the tree, instead of keeping my brush so this way, I'm kind of starting to turn it out as I brush it. That makes the branches look like they're a little more natural for the pine tree. So just take your time and look at it. You know, just think one little brush stroke at a time. You can always add more if you need to. This isn't a scientific drawing of a tree. You don't have to describe every single branch. You don't have to tell the viewer exactly how this tree works for them to understand what's going on here. I'm going to fill it in a little bit more at the bottom. Now we're going to do two more bravery tests over here. I'm going to make a smaller tree. And this one I'm going to start at the top. And it's just really fun. I love painting silhouetted pine trees with a flat brush. I just think they're so pretty. This one's gonna kind of go off the page because it's getting wider down here at the bottom. I I like to work my way down versus trying to map out the entire shape, because then you can let the width of it grow organically. And now you could decide that your pine tree is the type that doesn't go all the way to the bottom and leave it, and maybe even broaden out the base of the tree a little bit to kind of leave it like that. I want to fill it in. I do kind of like that look. I'm gonna fill it in because I did it on this one. If it were me personally, I would do them all either one way or another. That looks kind of cool. It helps you be able to see more water too. But again, it's the kind of thing you can add. If you don't like the way it looks, just add branches all the way to the ground. Or you can leave it like that. Just one brush stroke at a time and keep adding until you're happy. And then know when to stop. I think I'm gonna leave it like that. I actually really like that. So I'm gonna do another bravery test right here. Another pine tree. And I personally don't like things to be even when I'm painting, so I'm not doing one on each side. That's just a personal preference. Some artists will argue about which way is a stronger composition. In general, you don't want things dead center and even. So I'm just adding until I'm happy with it. There's all different kinds of pine trees, and like I've said before in this video, I encourage you, to really look around. When you're out in nature, observe things. That helps you when you're here painting, that you've looked at the trees, and there's all kinds of different pine trees, all different shapes. We have the benefit of having smartphones and can take pictures. Take pictures of things that inspire you, observe, sketch, draw. Pay attention to the shape of things when you're out and about, and that will help you when you're here painting. You wouldn't have to switch to a small brush, but I have one here. So now I'm going to take a small brush and I'm just going to add some little bits of grass and kind of mess up this line that I made so that it's not so flat and perfect. You can be really brave and add some really tall grasses, however you like. Just do it a little at a time until you're happy with it. I do like to leave the middle kind of flat, but I am going to mess it up a little bit so it's not so perfectly flat. To me, this looks like a little beach where you might go fishing right there, a little opening. You don't need it to be dry to go on to the next step, but for the video, I'm going to show you how to make two different sun shapes. They're really small in both of these paintings, and they're in white. I'm going to show you how to do it in black and white first. So I'm just going to set this aside. This is just a piece of scratch paper. I'm going to demonstrate with a marker the shape that you'll want to draw with your white paint markers. So there's two different ways to draw the sunset. I'm going to draw a line. Number one. Number two, I'm going to give you two ideas here. So here's your horizon line. One way to draw the sun with the white paint marker is to take your white marker and draw a light white line along the horizon, and then draw a half circle out the top of it and fill it in with your white paint marker. And then you can take your white paint marker and draw kind of light marks in the sky and over the water in that shape of a V. The white line on the horizon helps lend to the idea that the sun is dipping below. If you don't want your sun dipping below the horizon, say this is your horizon line of water, just draw a circle, fill it in with your white paint marker, and then same thing, draw some really light. It's almost like you're drawing a silhouette but with white. Draw some light atmospheric marks, and you can choose if you want to draw some light atmospheric marks in the water too. So now I'm going to put the finishing touches here on my painting, and I'm going to choose to do the sun dipping below the horizon line as in the sample here. And I've got my paint marker, and it is always good to have a scratch paper or something that you can mark on when you're using paint markers, because sometimes you just kind of need to get them warmed up, or like this one I need to clean off because I was using it over some yellow paint. So it's good to have something to scribble on that's not your art piece, because sometimes extra paint comes out and they can be a little unpredictable. If it's gonna do something like that, you want it to do it on your scratch paper, not your art piece. So now I'm feeling like this is ready. I'm gonna really lightly draw a line where the horizon of my water is. I'm gonna draw a half circle. I'm gonna fill it in. Now, watercolor paper won't tolerate a whole bunch of this paint marker scratching since you've painted on it. Keep aware, have your paint marker all shaken up so that you don't have to do more than one layer. If you don't have a paint marker, you can do this step with white acrylic paint or gouache. And then I'm gonna take this and I'm just gonna draw some white ripples in the water. Even though I still have plenty, I just feel like I need some up there. I'm gonna draw some little atmospheric lines around the sun. It's the same as a silhouette, just add slowly because you can always add more, but you can't take it away once it's on there. I also have decided that I want to add some geese or birds flying away. Again, I'm going to repeat observing nature when you're out there because it helps you when you come here. They kind of fly in a little V and fly up, and I'm going to make them small near the horizon line and a little bit bigger. And again, it helps if you have a scratch paper. So we want to think of it as less of a M, and think if someone just took that shape and stepped on it, so then it's more like this. You can even make them kind of uneven, make 2 strokes, so 1 and then 2. Up to you. Just practice a little on a sketch paper until you feel happy with the shape that you're making. So I'm going to start down here. And my pen kind of skipped a little, but I don't mind that because we're just giving like the idea of this, right? We don't have to tell every exact detail about these birds. And just do until you feel happy with it. So here's my finished piece. It's still drying a little bit, but I'm really happy, and most importantly, I really enjoyed making it. This is a great way to get to know your paints. I've done this composition many times, and every time it comes out different, and it's still one of my favorite compositions. So don't be afraid to repeat. If you want to try it again, you want to try a different composition, the best way to learn is by repetition, I think. And that's the way you get to know your paints and know how to make things happen on purpose instead of making it and it's really great and then you're wondering, did I make that happen or was it an accident? Go ahead and try it again. Do a couple. Try different colors, try different compositions of your silhouette, different tree shapes, and just get to know yourself and what you like the best. Most importantly, learn how to love the marks and the brush strokes and the art that comes out of your hands because you made it, and art should be fun. You should be enjoying yourself. So I hope you enjoyed this video and happy creating.